Today is the 28th day of Elul, the 1st of October. We're in chapter 23, the long chapter 23, or 22? 22. Short chapter 22 of Shorish Mitzvah Tefillah and Derech Mitzvah Secha. And we talked yesterday about Chochma Ilah, about wisdom being a chisel with which one breaks the calcified heart. And then there's another thing he mentions here, which is that wisdom is related to truth. In other words, and we said this is not truth in the sense of true or false. It's more true in the sense of authentic because it's dealing with the heart. It's not exactly nachon. Ad nachon hayom. And there's another thing we need to mention here. This idea, I don't remember that he says it directly, but it's so prevalent in the Zohar that you can't miss it. There's a whole article in the Zohar dedicated to this concept called Kava Midah. And it's what he means here. He means that when wisdom comes down, it comes like a measuring rod. Kava Midah means like a measuring rod, like a measuring stick that somebody would use, like in Ezekiel. At the end of Ezekiel, he sees an angel, and the angel is measuring everything with this rod. Midah. Okay, midos. Measurement, an amount. And so this, what it's saying is that the moment that you have a ruler, a measuring stick, something like that, that differentiates between things. Because then you can say this is so long and this is so long. You have a difference between them. If you don't have any kind of measurement, so there's really no sense of distinction between things. At least there's no sense of absolute. No, so that's what we're saying. The wisdom is this kava midah. It is this measurement stick.
There's no measurement.
What? Without wisdom, there's no measurement. Meaning, without wisdom, there's no ability.
It started maybe. This is what it means. It started the kava midah.
Again, yes, from wisdom begins. That's what we mean, that the chokhmah me'ayin timatzeh. That before that it's ayin. Before that there's no ayin. Doesn't mean that there's nothing. It just means there's nothing differentiable. There's nothing you can tell one thing apart from the other. That's what it's like a blob. There's no.
Same thing behind the yesh.
Okay, there's many meanings of ayin. Ayin usually just means that something doesn't exist, non-being. That's the way it is, but not nothingness. Nothingness is not a very good word because you're not sure what it means. Non-being means that so say it doesn't exist. So I say non-being. If I want to say that something is like we said, ein cheker, it's unfathomable. We can't understand it. You have to add some word to ayin in Hebrew.
This doesn't mean ayin, but it means ayin yesh.
So ayin v'yesh also, same thing. Depends where you're looking at the ayin and yesh. Sometimes ayin just means bittul. Bittul doesn't necessarily mean that I don't exist. It means that I'm submitting my will to someone. That's usually the meaning of bittul. So ayin is a tricky word. In any case, so why are we saying this? Because when it comes to speech, so we say that the child does not know how to speak until he can't say, the first word he says is father. The first syllable is ba. And that's father, abba. And the idea is that he's beginning to get that measuring rod coming down into his speech, his kava midah, and now he's beginning to differentiate between the syllables and the consonants, and he begins to be able to speak, to put words together. וזהו פירוש חד, דאחד שהוא עניין המשכת עולם הדיבור נרמז בדלת רבתי מן החוכמה שהוא החטא. So all this we saw, that from the chet, which is chokhmah, comes down the large dalet in the word echad, in the word one in Shema, and that is the world of speech, which begins with the letter dalet, דיבור. אך הנה להיות התהוות והמשכת חוכמה אלה מעצמות אור אינסוף ברוך הוא שלמעלה מעלה מגדר חוכמה ולמה כל עינון מידות יהיו כלל. So to be able to bring the infinite revelation, which is far beyond wisdom, it has no business at all with these measurements, with these midos, with these attributes, these measures. V'shiyumshach b'bchinat chokhmah liot an chakim, and to bring it down into wisdom, until we can say in the Patach Eliyahu, Ant Chakim, v'lo b'chokhmah idiyah, but Ant Chakim, you are wise, to even call the infinite wise, hu yerida gdola. This is a tremendous descent. When he says a tremendous descent, he means to say that this is a leap. It's much more than a descent. It's a leap. There has to be some. It's incommensurable. It's not continuous. Right. We call it ein aroch. There's no connection between the two. Al derech ma'amar hazeh bimkom dulato sham ata motzean v'tanuto. As the sages said, in the place where you find God's greatness, that is where you find His humility. What is His greatness? His humility, that He's willing to come down so low. That it's His humility that allows Him to come down into wisdom. That He's even willing to be considered great, like we just said. In place where you see His greatness, you see His humility. You can't even say that God is great where He is at His source. So even to call Him great is already a descent. To call God great is meaningless to God Himself. Because, not because to God Himself, but relative to God, it doesn't mean anything. And all the more so. So that's even greater. But the anav, so the humble here is to come and say, he has to strip himself, as it were, like a person who's humble, who has many, many achievements, and says all those don't matter. So in a sense, Hashem is like stripping himself of all he is in order to enclothe himself in wisdom or in greatness or whatever it is. Oh, so now we've come to something new. So here he says, for Hashem to be able to do this, he has to connect to something called Rav Chesed, great loving kindness. And this great loving kindness is, sometimes in the Zohar, it's one and the same thing with wisdom. Sometimes, like he says here, it's greater than wisdom. What does it mean here? To be of great loving kindness, he says, it's not the regular loving kindness, but it's still called loving kindness. Why? Chesed. Why do we call it Chesed? Because he's giving. Chesed is to give. And Hashem wants to give. But the usual type of giving that you talk about in the world, it's not good enough to describe what Hashem is doing when He's coming down into wisdom. It's much greater than that. As I said, sometimes in the Zohar...
Giving is not all the time chesed.
Huh?
Giving is not all the time chesed.
Why not?
It's chesed, but it's not all the time. You can give somebody
without feeling that it's a chesed.
anything.
It could be. But here, we can't use the regular meaning of loving kindness. Why can't we use the regular meaning of loving kindness? Because loving kindness it follows Newton's law, that if you give, you get back. Rav Chesed means that Hashem is not getting anything back from this. He's just giving. There's no retribution. There's nothing you can give Him back for this. Why did he say Rav Chesed? Why here is it different? Because we said earlier that wisdom here is connected to emet. We called it emet. We said truth. So it's the same thing as emet. Now in emet we said is the emet in the 13 measures of mercy. 13 midot harachamim. And there it says v'rav chesed ve'emet. So Rav Chesed is before emet. Great loving kindness is before wisdom. That's where this whole construct comes from. Emes here is the source of wisdom. That's how it's explained in the... Okay. It's not yes or no, or true and false. It's emes, in the sense of authentic. So what is this Rav Chesed? So he says, שלמעלה מקום עבור בחינת מים שיורדים מגבוה לנמוך. He says the only image we have for this, again, when somebody gives, that's loving kindness. But you look at the natural flow of water from a high place to a low place, that's called great loving kindness. Why great loving kindness? Because the water doesn't get anything. The water doesn't care.
It doesn't have a choice, it's going down anyway.
Yeah, it's going down. It's not better or worse for having gone down. It's like it's built into it. It's almost like you say. Okay. And this is a big principle in Kabbalah in general, and Chassidus also, that the higher you go, the less voluntary things are. The higher you go, the more natural they look. In other words, not even natural is not the right word, but nature is built this way. But the higher you go, the more things feel necessary. It can't be any other way. There's no other option. This is the only way things can be. The higher you go, that's the way it is. So here, you go higher, and the parable to understand this type of giving is like water flowing from a high place to a low place. ונמשך בחינת נוצר חסד, נוצר אותיות צינור, דהיינו שנמשך השפע בבחינת צמצום גדול כדי שיוכל להתלבש בבחינת חוכמה. And there's another thing that it says there, ורב חסד ואמת, but we also have נוצר חסד לאלפים. Elif is also connected to Chokhmah always. So we say Notzer Chesed, he guards or he keeps the loving kindness for thousands of generations. That's also from the 13 Principles of Mercy. And there the meaning is that to guard it is like to hold it. So to hold it here, the image is that he's doing a tzimtzum, he's contracting it. Why does he need to contract it? Because otherwise it won't be able to fit, as it were, into the wisdom that's coming into this world. It won't fit. It's simply something else. What's the parable for all this? It's very simple. The parable for all this is the Torah. Why is the Torah the parable? Why is it? Torah, first of all, comes from a high place to a low place, and it's likened to water. And there's a number of times in the Tanya that the Alter Rebbe describes Chokhmah, the Chokhmah of Torah, this way. The Torah comes from a high place to a low place, like water flows from a high place to a low place. But there's another thing that's said, and I've talked about this here a number of times, that when Hashem gave the Torah, he contracted himself into every letter. Meaning he took himself and he fitted himself somehow. Anochi is, which is a word in Egyptian, Anok, which means I. So we took this word, and it becomes the first word of the Ten Commandments. And the Rebbe has a beautiful sikha on this, why Hashem would do this, but the point is that in order to be meaningful, the Torah has to penetrate even the languages of the nations, particularly the language of the international language at the time, Egyptian, which was the greatest language then at the time. It has to penetrate even there. Even that has to subjugate itself to the Torah. And so he says, Anochi, it means I have taken myself and put myself into these letters. וזהו פירוש נוצר חסד לאלפים. והוא עניין 2000 שנה קדמה תורה, שהם 2,000 אלף חוכמה, 1,000 בינה. And these are, when we say that he gives it for 1,000 generations, so he takes the word 1,000 and he connects it to a verse in Job which says Alefcha Bina, which from Alefcha Chokhmah, sorry. And from that the sages add that and they say Alefcha Bina also. In other words, they take the word 1,000 and they turn it. So they took the word 1,000 and they turned it into 2,000. And because it's the same word, alafim and alpaim, you write it exactly the same. Whether you say thousands and you say 2,000, exactly the same word. So then they say the Torah came before the world, preceded the world 2,000 years. What do you mean 2,000 years? So very simple. It says that a day in your eyes is 1,000 years. And the world was created in 7 days, 6 days in the Shabbos. So what does it mean that there were 2,000 years before the world? There were 2 more days as a word. They're not 2 days. We don't have 2 more days. But if the first day is Chesed, the second day is Gvura, and so on, so the first 2 days before, the 2,000 before these 7 days, they're Chokhmah and Bina. And they're wisdom and understanding, because that's the order of the Sfirot. So it makes sense. So what was going on there? So we call that Shashuei HaMelech Ba'atzmuto. We said that Hashem was enjoying the Torah recreating. I call it recreation because I love that word. It's like recreating and recreating more and more and more options. All the different permutations, all the different options Hashem was playing with them. And by the way, that's the source of a person who's really a virtuoso in Torah, is that he can play with it. If you're not at the stage where you can play with things, then you're not yet at that level of Chokhmah and Bina. You don't need to have a brain. You have Midos, which is good. But Midos, like we said, it's limited. Midos means measurement, it's limited. Here we're saying this is all before Hashem started creating the world in a limited way. Okay, so we'll end with this today. That's what I said. Okay? You can keep going further. טוב, 1000